Hey everybody, welcome to the Dreamer's Edge podcast.
With Nicholas, I write video game reviews for thedreamersedge.com.
Eric, I'm a teacher, sometimes writer.
And Chris, occasional writer and subtitle editor.
And I'm Dimitri, webmaster of thedreamersedge.com and movie critic, and this is part 2 of our discussion of the best of the 70s, in which Chris and I will reveal our top 3 movies of the 70s, and Eric will somehow digress into a discussion of how art affects the soul.
Yeah, it's my fault there's a part 2, because I kind of went off.
Actually, I was hoping
part 1.
I was actually hoping you would, because the episodes tend to run a bit longer than I would like when we're 4 regardless. And so you just pushed it over the edge when I was like, oh, we can just split it in 2, it'll be interesting.
There you go.
Let's not waste any time, because I know we're going to run long again. Anyway, so Chris, why don't you get us started?
The 70s. I'm a big fan of crime fiction. The one that I think really stands as like a perfect film, in a way, is Chinatown.
Oh, yeah.
So, going back again to Polanski, 1974, so we've got some amazing performances by Jack Nicholson.
And Jack Nicholson, that wasn't necessarily Jack Nicholson.
No, he's not trying
he
to...
wasn't a sketch, he wasn't the Joker.
Well, yeah, like De Niro, Pacino, and Jack Nicholson now, we've all mentioned in the last 2 episodes, all of them before their classic personas were formed,
exactly.
And therefore when they were still interesting as performers.
Absolutely.
Still acting.
Yeah.
So, and John Huston, of course, is great in it. So this is, for me, just a great... evocative film that calls to mind all like the 50s Marlowe's style film noirs, and it's just so well done. It's just like, and it ends with like an interesting reveal, and it's just so damning. The private eye just gets beaten down, and part of that trope, and it's just like he's desperately trying. It's just like, even if he solves the crime, like, he doesn't come across as better.
And even the image that you have, it's not like glossy, it's kind of sweaty, and I like that. It felt real.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Chinatown has nothing to do with the Chinese or the Chinese community in America at all. And so there's that one moment in the movie where the title does come up. It's sort of like when they shoehorn the James Bond title in the James Bond movies. But it's so powerful when that comes back that it's devastating. It's absolutely.
But I love that. I love those kinds of stories that have like the title that kind of makes no sense. You're like, Chinatown. Okay, they're going to be in Chinatown. It's not really that, and it's a question of that word becomes a whole different meaning when you get that story, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, this is different. I love that. It gives a new definition to a word that you have, and in a sense you kind of get that story. It's like it becomes this definition of this word, of this title. Let me tell you a story to define this. It's almost like a Greek myth in a sense. And I love that. I almost feel like it builds your vocabulary in a sense, like, wow, I got to know this word just by this story.
Yeah. And it informs you on how to look at the movie. Because often you see a movie, you can see the plot, but not necessarily the themes. But by giving it that title and giving that meaning to that title, you look at the story in a completely different way. Again, it's just great.
And kind of feeding back to the previous recording, but... that was kind of my question when we were talking about Barry Lyndon, is, shouldn't a piece, in a way inform you by the end of it how to view it? Maybe not to give you all the solutions or whatever, but you should, after spending that amount of time with a piece, you should come out of it being able to understand it a little bit more.
It's funny that you mention this, because I do think that some artists, some even filmmakers are going to say, like, look, I'm telling you a story that's completely different. I'm not going to teach you how to view it. Just keep watching it. Come on. Okay. There's a payoff here.
Yeah, no, I'm not necessarily disagreeing. And I don't think there's a single definition for what art is.
Or how to look at it also. There are different approaches. Yeah. I mean, like, even your choice in the last couple of episodes, you've made your choice. I've noticed that you have a very genre-oriented approach. And I imagine that is indicative of how you view film as well, as sort of... Does it meet the requirements of the genre? Does it take the genre, elevate the genre, or take it in different?
Yeah, very much.
And it's because you have a broader view of what literature is.
Yeah. I don't read much poetry, so I just want to put that out there since it makes it. A lot of macho books I read.
I read the Tool Time adaptation.
Yeah. Outside magazine.
50 Shades of Grey.
Just the pictures. Okay, can I move on to my second one?
Yes, sure.
Before you start shaming yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so going number 2. You mentioned story, Eric LaRue. So the thing that I've talked about, I think, in some of the other podcasts is I like something that kind of like gives you a worldview that's somewhat uncompromising. You know what I mean? Like I like it when I see it in science fiction because it creates this world. You know what I mean? Like you see it in other places. You know. And in this one, I was actually thinking about Clockwork Orange as kind of a choice for this one. Passing over Star Wars, you know what I mean? Like I just assumed Frank would be here and he's not. But no, I didn't really want to choose Star Wars. You know, people who are going to be listening to this podcast have probably discovered Star Wars on their own. That's what it comes down to. So I think I'm going to go with Deer Hunter. There's a certain type of cinema that came out in the 70s that was still being fueled by that experimental 60s. That was still auteur driven and wasn't overrun by basically the business of the blockbuster of the 80s, the 90s, and now the aughts, you know. And The Deer Hunter is a type of film that I don't think we could ever see now, is almost what it comes down to. Like
Especially that wedding scene that goes on.
It's basically
forever.
It's an uncompromising film in a way. Like just like it's got a way it's going to tell you the movie, and it's really like 2 films, you know. And you know you've got that beginning, and then they go off to war, and you know like the wedding, which is the beginning of life, is also their goodbye of these people who are about to go off to war, and then the war happens, and you catch up with these characters, and they get caught by the Viet Cong, and it's a horrible, horrible thing. You've spent that much time with them at this drunken party, getting to know them, people acting out, you know, and talking themselves up, saying goodbye, having those tearful moments, and then you cut, and then you see them, and they've survived something that I could never, and have never, and will never, you know, like I hope to God, you know what I mean? And it's so visceral as a tool for storytelling, but it's effective, but it means almost 50 minutes spent at a party. Like it's like, you know, it's an extended scene. It could be a movie on its own nowadays, you know, and it's an investment. We tell stories with almost a shorthand now, you know, and this one takes a sense of luxury in the way it introduces the characters, in as much as, you know, a party gives you those quick little moments and things happening, you know, and you're kind of like moving over here. It's even hard to understand what they're saying sometimes because they're singing, there's this, and there's people going on and talking over each other, but it is such a payoff because then you go to war and there's, as much as there's the frenetic action of war, there's some really quiet scenes in that, and they're so haunting because of it. And it's just like, and you leave that movie and it's just like...
so many big stars also. And Christopher Walken,
yes,
who is incredible. Yeah. Absolutely.
He's haunting in this movie.
The scene where he plays Russian roulette.
Oh, yeah.
And takes it to a completely different level.
Yeah.
And, like, communicates hopelessness in a way that I have not seen in film since.
You know what I mean? Like, you got the other side of, like, you know, like, classical literature. You come back from war, you're a stronger person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in this one, it's like, no, you come back from war... if you're lucky, and if you come back, you're not the person you were.
No, you're completely fucked up. And when you're watching that big party, the wedding scene, you're getting that sense of getting to know people. You get that awkward sense of walking into a party, people are talking and everything. You're getting snippets of conversations.
You've got people who normally don't wear suits, wearing suits that don't quite fit. You know,
exactly.
It really feels real.
I haven't seen the movie.
Oh, you have to.
From what I gather, you have like a party at the beginning or wedding, so you get to know the characters and kind of care for them.
And then they go off to the Vietnam War, basically.
You think today it's basically kind of a lazy way of saying, you know, this is the main character, you need to care for him without actually even, you know, giving you any reason to know him or whatever. He's your main character, care for him.
We'll see a couple of things during the opening credit sequence.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we'll hit the ground running.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is today.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But this one, it does take... And it's a long wedding scene.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, like, what? This is like 40, 50 minutes? It's almost an hour wedding scene that you would never have in any film.
Twilight the most recent.
No,
one.
you would have.
She has a point though. That wedding scene goes on for freaking ever.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it's not like meanwhile the vampires are plotting. No, it's just a wedding scene with two people being very happy and in love. Actually, to be honest, the fourth Twilight movie, which 3/4 of the movie is that, I actually kind of liked and found refreshing exactly for that reason. I was like, oh, they went there. They just presented a wedding and assumed that we cared about these characters. Good for you. Like, you know.
It's a ripoff.
So
But
the
yeah.
parallels between that and the Deer Hunter,
Exactly.
the Vietnam War is really the birth. That Then the first one is maybe a little bit of a smaller film, but it's one that's really kind of close to me. Is 1979's Being There?
Oh, you ruined it all.
Peter
Peter's.
Sellers.
Oh yeah.
So this is based on a novel written by Jerzy Kosinski, who committed suicide, I think, in '91. And he'd written 3 books, and this is one of them. But it's basically about this character.
Gardener.
He's a gardener. His name's Chance. You can call him retarded. Who knows what he is? But he's been sheltered. He's a little bit slow. He's lived with basically tending garden for this wealthy man his whole life. He's never stepped out of this home. He's been protected since birth. The man dies, and he's basically kicked off onto the street. And then it's like a series of strange events where he doesn't really know how to communicate with the world except through little pieces of information or anecdotes or lines that he's picked up through watching television through his life. He gets
gardening.
And gardening. So, he doesn't really even know his name, so, people misunderstand him. He ends up being called Chauncey Gardner or something. And ends up being taken into the fold. He eventually becomes president.
Wow.
And it's obviously a parable, you know what I mean? And the interesting backstory about this one is that Peter Sellers is famous for, basically doing impersonations, being a comedian, moving more towards something a little bit more dramatic here. And obviously there's some comedic elements here, but in a way it's a very sad film. It's this character that doesn't know himself and people don't know who gets elevated, And what's that say about America? What's that say about America being written by an immigrant to the States? He was quite critical about it, And, Peter Sellers basically kept hounding Kaczynski, saying, like, I want to be this part. He bought the rights to it. He's like, let's do the film. And, like, Kaczynski wouldn't, first want to sell, wouldn't do the film, wouldn't sign off on it. And he was so insisting. He's like, I am this character because I have no more personality because of all the characters I've been, was his argument,
Yeah.
And there's a sense of that, and obviously Peter Sellers was a very, very sad person as well.
Yes.
And there's that level of, like, kind of this undercurrent of sadness to this film that...
Yeah, there is. It's like the sad clown.
Yeah, exactly. That doesn't go maudlin in any way and doesn't take away from the film, doesn't make the film a sad film, but you've got this surface story that's kind of like this weird, kind of like funny thing that's happening in this parable.
But that's just sad.
But underneath, there's this sense of really depth, you know what I mean, to the character. And, like any testament to Peter Sellers' acting here, where normally he's so broad in everything he does, like Inspector Clouseau's French accent, and all that.
Although, I still find that there's a certain sadness in the way he does Clouseau.
Yeah.
That's what made those movies work, and the Steve Martin work.
It was horrible. Yeah.
But, and not just that, and being there, like, he's in this huge mansion, and it's big, it's empty, and here's this guy that is saying all these things about, like, plants growing and everything, and it's still. Like, all of the things that he's talking about, like, he's talking in a still environment. It's basically a gardener in a museum. It's like,
he's living in a
there's
bubble.
nothing. Exactly. And it's an interesting contrast, too, where you see the film, like, very still environment the entire time.
But it's about that failure to communicate, you know what I mean? Like, he's saying one thing, people are interpreting something else,
And he can't necessarily connect. Like, obviously, like, his
so
speech, like, people are finding him like a philosopher.
Yeah.
Like, what they're interpreting. And it's true, he's kind of touching on big themes, in a sense, just talking about little gardens and everything else. It is sad, and sometimes very funny, and at the same time, kind of beautiful.
It's funny because I knew we were going to split this conversation into two, and I deliberately sort of made sure that Eric and Nick would be together and Chris and I would be together, because I knew that the distribution between commercial or sort of mainstream movies would be well separated that way, where Eric, you would touch on much more esoteric films than Nick would, and I would touch on much more commercial films than Chris would. Although we're talking about classic successes with all three movies here. But so my number 3 starts off with a rather offbeat tone, considering what we've just talked about.
The Exorcist is in there somewhere. Can I just
Nope.
call you up? Really?
Yeah. No. Godfather 2 is going to be my number 3. Eric took it, so I'm going to go with the 12 Tasks of Asterix, 1976 cartoon, French cartoon, Les 12 Travaux d'Astérix.
Good call.
I didn't realize it was actually that old.
Yeah, me neither.
Written and produced by René Goscinny, who wrote Asterix. I'm sure most of you know it.
That's a great choice, actually.
Yeah.
That's a really good choice.
Indeed.
Yeah, it gave birth to Idéfix Studios, which created some of the best cartoons of the era, based on mostly Goscinny's properties. But here's the thing, I mentioned in the 90s how Aladdin gave birth to Shrek and all of that by introducing the 2 levels of humor. The 12 Tasks of Asterix did it 20 years before, and did it flawlessly.
And there's a scene where Asterix, they need to have like this special tablet, and they need to go upstairs, they need to go downstairs to get this form, to get this form, to get the WH form, the WT, the W, whatever. And it's that kind of ridiculousness, bureaucracy.
Yeah.
But, it's a French film, so they're used to meaningless bureaucracy. But, absolutely. And especially when you have to see, like, some of the paperwork that you go through, some things, you're like, oh, God.
As a kid, I didn't get that, but my father, he laughed every time. And he was that's his favorite part of the movie.
Exactly. It makes perfect sense.
I didn't get it. Now we watch it now, and, like, that part is hilarious, because we've all lived it now,
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of adaptations from the actual BD, what I mean? Like, it's very faithful. But it's still, like, it stands and it's fun, and it's just, the voices are really good, and it's just, I don't know, like, it's got a lot of energy. That's why I really didn't think it was 78. I don't know, I thought it was 80s. It's weird. I don't know.
And I think it directly influenced, like, the live action films that they did, with Gérard Depardieu and everything. Like, even when you heard their voice, they kind of sounded like the Asterix from the 70s, from the cartoon. And lots of kind of self-referential, lots of little inside jokes that are not as obvious, let's say, as Shrek would make it, but they're still there.
And yet there are a couple that are quite overt. Like, he did postmodern before postmodern was really a thing, There are spots where they just outwardly mention, it was like, wait a minute, are you saying this is just a story and a cartoon? It's like, yeah, and why are we here for? And then just elsewhere.
Exactly.
And the animation was crisp, like you say. It doesn't feel like a 70s film.
No, it doesn't.
No, for sure.
Alright, so that's my number 3. My number 2. Alright, so you've mentioned The Exorcist. You knew there was going to be a horror movie in there. And I did find myself hesitating because you had some very important horror movies in there. You have Halloween, which started the slasher film. That's in 1978. You had The Exorcist in 73. That's sort of... all possession movies ever made since then are essentially remakes of The Exorcist. But I decided to go with a movie that I like more personally, and also because it's a bit underrated in terms of how much it influenced cinema in the future, especially today. And that's Dawn of the Dead, George Romero, 1978.
Ooh.
Zombie apocalypse survivors gather in a mall and try to survive there. If you've seen The Walking Dead, it's just an extended version of that movie. If you've seen any zombie movie, it's just an extended version, not of Night of the Living Dead, which really started it all, but really of Dawn of the Dead, which really created that formula, but also did something that few other of its copies does, make a really poignant social statement and take the time to explore its characters. Rewatching it, I was caught by the fact that, my God, 3/4 of this movie is just 4 people having fun in a mall and just building a life.
I love that.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. I love seeing it on the screen sometimes, or even reading people that are kind of wasting time, killing time. Where I'm like, oh, look at that. They're just doing something casual that everybody would do.
Going back to the fact that the 70s was such a botched era in terms of the economy. It's interesting, I guess, you know what I mean? And I haven't read that much analysis in terms of why there's a rise in zombie film again now.
Right.
You know, but, so what's your take then, you know?
Well, it makes sense.
What is it, you know, like, the zombies are people with bad credit?
No, but we live in a time that's completely overpopulated, where everybody is alienated to one another. That, you know, people are watching their iPhones or whatever, like that's right there in the metro. They're completely alienated to other people, and we live in a time where there's never been this many people on the planet. So yeah, it is incredibly alienated. And you do feel completely isolated, and you know, it's an ironic thing. There's more people on Facebook than there are actually like community. They're creating a cyber community, but not talking to each other. They need to talk to each other via like the computer, not meeting.
All they talking means clicking a button that says like. In fairness,
yeah, that's it. So it's that kind of thing. So I think it makes perfect sense. Of having zombies like coming up, it does, I think, express that kind of alienation of what's out there.
Chris, I like the way you're sort of linking it to possibly the financial crisis and whatnot, because I think there is a common device in all zombie apocalypse movies is, of course, the notion of limited resources.
That's why they dress so poorly.
Wow.
On that note.
What's your next choice?
No, but one of the things, since you bring it to today, one of the things that I find George Romero's Dawn of the Dead does tremendously well that zombie movies today do not do is that it makes a full social and a statement, one that is balanced and thought out. Not just a social accusation or denunciation. Mm-hmm. It is about consumerism, but if you watch the movie, watch very carefully how much people care about their possessions, what they mean to them, what they're willing to give up for them, and the mistakes some of the characters make. The movie's not going like consumerism's bad. They're saying, no, we are creatures who depend on our possessions. That is what the human being is. But there's a limit as to how much you should be willing to give up for them. It's a much more thoughtful thing than to just sort of like, okay, zombies are going to be AIDS. Zombies are going to be communism. Zombies are going to be the right way. You know, it's not an accusation. It's a full thought out thesis, and I love that.
If we're going to talk about monster movies for a second, I guess I've always sided more towards the zombie or the werewolf movie, and less so towards the vampire movie. In that the vampire has always he's been a talking character, so he becomes a character in the movie. Whereas I prefer the monster to be kind of unspeaking in a way, and I like the zombie for that because it can become a thing. It can become a metaphor. It can become a sense. It forces the characters being chased to then kind of justify their lives or justify their existence to me, and it's those characters I'm more interested in. I don't care how sexy the vampire is, you know. You know, and so I've always liked that about Romero's films. He's really, you know, and he's continued that theme. You know, like his latest is what, like Zombie Island or something. Like he's really like it's a little bit silly, but at the same time he is still doing something interesting. He's just putting it into different scenarios.
Right. All right. My number one pick, something a little bit more traditional, but something that I was afraid would be overlooked, so I needed to put in there. My number one pick for best movies of the 70s is 1978's Rocky.
I love that film.
I really assumed someone else would pick it, and I'm surprised it took this long to get there, because it's a great, great film.
Yeah,
it is.
You know, and you talk about my love for genre, you know what I mean? Like, there's the genre of the sports film, for sure. You know? And this one is just, you know, it really...
It glamorized, like, boxing.
Yeah.
It is kind of like the boxing film that everybody refers to. And
I wonder in terms of the contrast, too, you know what I mean? Like, it... And obviously I wasn't watching it at the time, and I didn't watch it at the time, but it's coming out of a period where you've kind of glamorized Bruce Lee, the Kung Fu flick, and all these things where it's just like, it's so much art. And then you basically got this clumsy American guy in these like star-spangled shorts, really just like punching with all his heart.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's a completely different style of like fight film, but it's just like, it's an interesting kind of contrast, you know? And it's really just he gets through it with just like hard work, training, and on his own almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's a question of heart, right? He gives it all, and that's the one thing I kind of like about Rocky. Like he's an adorable character. He's not the smartest guy in the block, but at the same time, like he's almost a philosopher, and I like that. I like that a lot. And Sylvester Stallone, it's interesting because here is this guy that was completely an underdog in the Hollywood system. Like,
yeah, he peddled that screenplay for what, 3 years?
Yeah, exactly. And Italian Stallion, that was like his porn name, and you can tell, like he knew who this character is, like total underdog, because he is an underdog. And even when you hear him talk, like he's really interesting because he knows that he has a mouth on his side, and people tell him to enunciate all the time, and he doesn't take it to heart. It's just like, yeah, I know. So I love that. I love that about him. I love that about Rocky, like because he does feel real.
Yeah,
and I think that's why
that movie though that just like colors everything that Stallone got involved in afterwards. You know, he made so many bad films. You know, you're still like, but you did that. You know what I mean? Like you know what's good because you even made it yourself. You know
that in First Blood.
You know, like it's not that you just got a chance to be cast in it. Like, no, you wrote it. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like buddy. You know what I mean? Like you should be able to be a better choice of like, scripts. You know what I mean? Like, but like
he had agents.
He had agents. You know what I mean? But it's just like it's.
But if you look at the Rocky franchise, like 1 is excellent, 2, it's okay, 3, I don't know, guilty pleasure.
Awful.
I like it.
Awful.
I like it. I just like the fight scene with Mr. T.
I pity the fool who doesn't like Mr. T. Come on.
4, kind of good.
See, that one's my guilty pleasure.
That
I like it.
It's ridiculous. It's so over the top.
It is over the top, like super
it's the
fun.
best.
5, it's shit.
I actually think 5 is at the same level as 2, a little bit under, but barely.
6, I really liked it.
Yeah, me too.
I loved it a lot. I thought that it was probably one of his best films to bookend the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's... You know what? I think that's a great way to finish it.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I do feel that all the numbered sequels make one fatal mistake in relation to the original, is that they follow Rocky's journey.
Yeah.
Because if you look at Rocky, what's interesting about him is that he's sort of like this working class Buddha Zen type guy who makes all the right calls. He's sort of perfect. Like the only moment of doubt he has is just before the big fight, where he goes like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. That guy's really strong. Then he takes a walk in the middle of the night, comes back to Adrian, and goes like, you know what? I don't need to make it to the end. I just need to try. All right, I'm good. Like, that's it. Like, he's just this perfect human being. And the person going through a transformation, a journey, is actually Adrian, who's inspired by him. She's sort of her muse. She's like this mousy little creature who at the end, like what the final shot is not Rocky winning. It's Adrian having the courage to go through a crowd to get to him.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what I found so moving and so powerful about Rocky, that when I saw the sequels focused on his imperfections, on who he is as a human being, I went like, I think you missed the point a little bit.
Yeah. And it's probably also one of the best endings because he doesn't win.
Yeah, that's the thing. It was
That's
never
what I love.
It was never his objective to win anyway.
Exactly.
And that was it. And it wasn't like a typical corny movie where I'm super underdog, but we're going to win the championship and we're the best. No, it was
but
just.
I like that,
and
it's always very inspiring because it's that kind of thing of. It's all about putting one foot in front of the other. One foot.
Well, one of the things that this movie does, that I think something like The Gladiator doesn't do. You know what I'm talking about? The Gladiator with Russell Crowe, and it follows the same thing where it's just like kind of an underdog or a nobody who kind of apparently it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. With The Gladiator, it happens and you don't even see it happening almost, or you don't see enough of it. But they follow the pace for that with Rocky so well that you see the town starting to follow him. You see people running. You know what I mean? Like you see that movement, and that suddenly people start believing in him, and like there's this sense of hope. Even just him getting the next bout, you know what I mean? Like booked and everything. And it's just like, and I found that really sweeps you along, and it's something that is just like you're watching The Gladiator. I'm like, I don't feel anything here. I'm just waiting for the next fight scene. You know what I mean? But it's just like, but it's predicated on me thinking that he's gaining momentum and his name is known in the halls of whatever shit kebab.
I do want to add as well, the musical score by Bill Conti.
Yeah,
Rocky
absolutely.
is fabulous. It is some of the most inspiring stuff. Like, this is the music I use to train. You know, like, no other music will do. Not because it reminds me of Rocky, just because it just pushes you forward. It just does. And there's one tune that I listened on the soundtrack that is sort of the main theme, but just with the notes going a little bit downer and with some notes added in between the notes to make it sort of slower, and it gives me the sense of waiting and sort of having to push through something bigger. And like, this is not me watching it with the scene, it was just the sound. And then I look at the name of the track, it's called Redemption. Like, somehow Bill Conti understood exactly what sounds he needed to put in there to make me feel that way. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
High five, guys.
On that note, if you want to share with us your favorite movies of the 70s, please write us at mail@thedreamersedge.com or post a comment. Please post a comment. We love comments. At thedreamersedge.com. We're also on Facebook. We're also on Twitter. And next time we'll discuss the worst of the 70s. And as much as there were some amazing stuff in the 70s, I gotta say, it was not that difficult for me to find bad ones.
They're there for sure.
Yeah, they're there.
Oh, yeah.
So, till next time.
Toodaloo.
There you go. Let's not waste any time, because I know we're going to run long again. Anyway, so Chris, why don't you get us started?
The 70s. I'm a big fan of crime fiction. The one that I think really stands as like a perfect film in a way is Chinatown.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, going back again to Polanski, 1974, you know, so we've got some amazing performances by Jack Nicholson.
And Jack Nicholson, that wasn't necessarily Jack Nicholson.
No, he's not trying to...
He wasn't a sketch, he wasn't the Joker.
Well, yeah, like De Niro, Pacino, and Jack Nicholson now, we've all mentioned in the last two episodes, all of them before their classic personas were formed,
exactly.
And therefore when they were still interesting as performers.
Absolutely.
Still acting. You know?
Yeah.
So, and, you know, and John Huston, of course, is great in it. So this is, for me, just a great... evocative film that calls to mind all like the 50s Marlowe's style film noirs, and it's just so well done. You know, it's just like, and it ends with like an interesting reveal. You know, and it's just so damning. The private eye just gets beaten down. You know, and part of that trope, and it's just like he's desperately trying. It's just like, even if he solves the crime, like, he doesn't come across as better.
And even the image that you have, you know, it's not like glossy, it's kind of sweaty, and I like that. It felt real.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Chinatown has nothing to do with the Chinese or the Chinese community in America or all. And so there's that one moment in the movie where the title does come up. It's sort of like when they shoehorn the James Bond title in the James Bond movies, but it's so powerful when that comes back that it's devastating. It's absolutely.
But I love that. I love those kinds of stories that have like the title that.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Dreamer's Edge podcast.
With Nicholas, I write video game reviews for thedreamersedge.com.
Eric, I'm a teacher, sometimes writer.
And Chris, occasional writer and subtitle editor.
And I'm Dimitri, webmaster of thedreamersedge.com and movie critic, and this is part 2 of our discussion of the best of the 70s, in which Chris and I will reveal our top 3 movies of the 70s, and Eric will somehow digress into a discussion of how art affects the soul.
Yeah, it's my fault there's a part 2, because I kind of went off.
Actually, I was hoping
part 1.
I was actually hoping you would, because the episodes tend to run a bit longer than I would like when we're 4 regardless. And so you just pushed it over the edge when I was like, oh, we can just split it in 2, it'll be interesting.
Kind of makes no sense. You're like Chinatown. Okay, they're going to be in Chinatown. It's not really that. And it's a question of that word becomes a whole different meaning when you get that story. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow. this is different. I love that. It gives a new definition to a word that you have. And in a sense, you kind of get that story. It's like it becomes this definition of this word, of this title. Let me tell you a story to define this. It's almost like a Greek myth in a sense. And I love that. I almost feel like it builds your vocabulary in a sense, you know? Like, wow, I got to know this word just by this story.
Yeah. And it informs you on how to look at a movie. Because often you see a movie, you can see the plot, but not necessarily the themes. But by giving it that title and giving that meaning to that title, you look at the story in a completely different way. Again, it's just great.
And kind of feeding back to the previous recording, but that was kind of my question when we were talking about Barry Lyndon. Is you know, like, shouldn't a piece, you know, in a way inform you by the end of it how to view it? You know, maybe not to give you all the solutions or whatever, but you should, after spending that amount of time with a piece, you should come out of it being able to understand it a little bit more.
It's funny that you mentioned this, because I do think that some artists, some even filmmakers, are going to say, like, look, I'm telling you a story that's completely different. I'm not going to teach you how to view it. Just keep watching it. Come on. Okay. There's a payoff here.
Yeah, no, I'm not necessarily disagreeing. And I don't think there's a single definition for what art is.
Or how to look at it also. There are different approaches.
Yeah.
I mean, like, even in your choice in the last couple of episodes, you've made your choice. I've noticed that you have a very genre-oriented approach. And I imagine that is indicative of how you view film as well. As sort of, does it meet the requirements of the genre? Does it take the genre, elevate the genre, or take it in a different way?